Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Torah on Tap. I'm not sure if you saw the email, but there was a email that just went out about a half hour ago, bidding farewell to our Jessica Zaga. She is she's leaving. She's resigned. She's spent a good 11 years here. We are so proud of everything that she's done here. We're going to miss her very much here on the Monday nights. Certainly, she was someone who was so dedicated to all the details, making sure everything was beautiful, everything done on time, and we are definitely going to miss her. And we are desperately looking for someone to replace her. So if you know anyone, you throw their name in the bag right now. I am running a little late today because I had some issues with the printer. God bless you. And I am actually, from before that, I finished my class earlier today, and you'll notice that if you're familiar with my sheets, there's like there's numbers that are missing, and this is not the way I like to push out my material, but there's been changes made to the Safari website, and the way in which I build my sources now have changed, and it's really annoying, so I apologize about that as well. I was the later half of my day today, I was at something called Menorah Partners, which is I think Chabad-run like business networking event. I just came from there, and interestingly, the panel was focusing solely on like anti-Semitism and what you and I can do to respond to it. And I walked out in the middle, obviously, because I had to come here, and I really felt like I'm not doing enough, and I'm very uninspired to teach my class right now. I'm going to do it anyway. I want to tell you a little bit why I put together this material. Not because I don't think the material is important. I think it's important, but I also think that people are hurting and people are in pain. I don't realize how bad it is out there, because even though you see what you see on the internet and you hear what you hear on the news, I think it's worse than it really is. If you're hearing about it, those little trickle in your news feeds about anti-Semitism, and you're watching people doing these horrible things and the chants and whatnot, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There's way more that you're not seeing. There's way more that you're not hearing. And I know that this is, for me, like this is like my personal, this material that I have here tonight is more of like my personal interest. I'm very interested in seeing how Judaism has an ancient tradition that talks about an ancient world that no longer exists. And so like these classes, the Jewish Path of Unseen and Mysticism, is all really about my deep desire to kind of like spend more time on like ripping out the sources that talk about those ideas, like what happened to ancient civilizations, like what is the Jewish take on ancient civilizations? Is the world older than we say it is? Like how do we deal with the Gemarot that speak about the 974 generation that lived before? Is that metaphor? Is that figurative? Is that literal? So that's what we've been doing over the last few weeks, even though I think we haven't been here for like a month. But that's what we've been trying to kind of like, and for me, the reason why that's important is because what I'm trying to kind of like give over in a nutshell, if you haven't figured it out yet, is that the sages, the ancient sages, were not just parroting these ideas that were 2,000 years old. They have an ancient tradition that's way older about the world, the earth, the geography, the way in which the planet works. And I think that's so important, because it wasn't just that you couldn't figure this stuff out sitting in a cave. Like a lot of the information, and even so much of what's in this sheet right over here tonight, is really about how do they know about plate tectonics? How do they know about how do they know about ideas about the actual continents have changed and the way they align with one another changed? How do they know there was no continent in the north? How do they know that 3,000 years ago? Where did that come from? So obviously, I'm going to make the argument that there was God bless you. See, triple sneezes when I speak means triple truths. Okay, when I present this material, it's more about seeing how everything I'm going to say is not me. Everything I'm saying is a quote from someplace else. Okay, I am presenting information that if you were Talmudic students in the academy, this is stuff you may have glossed over and not really paid closer attention to. And what I want to do is I want to highlight it and ask those questions. Well, what is it there? What is it really trying to tell? And again, with the goal of trying to hopefully show each of you that this information is relevant. They had information that was cutting edge for today, even considering they were ancient people. And I believe that the only way they could have possessed this information is they had a tradition a very old tradition that had to have come from a source that is outside of human knowledge and wisdom, something that is beyond human knowledge. But there's no way they could have had this access. They're talking about understanding things on a planetary level. You couldn't figure that out if you're sitting in a cave in Jerusalem. You had to have someone who went out, understood the world, who maybe someone who could even see things from a bird's eye view, something that I would imagine that most people cannot have had access to 2,000, 3,000 years ago. So that's what this is. Now, while I think this is so important, because I think it's important for us to be aware of these things, aware of the veracity of our tradition, but I also think it's important to be present in the here and the now. And I'm going to be doing a series of classes on anti-Semitism over the next few weeks. It's based on an old series of lectures called Why the Jews. It was put together by Torah, and before that Arachim, understanding anti-Semitism. I think it's super relevant to us today. I think that most people, maybe not here, but most Jews, I don't think really know how to talk about anti-Semitism in a way that's meaningful to Jews or to non-Jews. I think we don't know how to really respond to any of it. And instead of, I'm a very big believer in always being proactive. I speak about that all the time. Your mindset, going out there and go get the job done, go do it. And I think that, if we can do a little bit more to enhance our own understanding about how we communicate, how we speak about Jew hatred, anti-Semitism, doesn't really carry weight anymore. But I think hate does. And hating any person is a problem from a Jewish perspective. And so I just think that these are things that we need to speak about. I've strategically have not had any kind of, I've had no, what's the word I'm looking for? I've put zero content out on TikTok because I just feel like it's a lost platform. And even though I know that that's where so much of this content lives, and I haven't been there for one reason, because when I tried it for one day, the amount of nudity and obscene videos that I got was so disturbing. I just felt like a rabbi should not be on that platform, and I kind of I've taken a new stance on that. I'm going to set up my TikTok tomorrow, God willing, and I'm going to try to, not because I'm looking for nudity or any of that content, because I really believe that each one of us has a voice. And we each have a story that, I'll take it in a minute, we each have a story we need to tell. And that if that is where, the algorithm lives and that's where people are pushing, then that's where I need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, now speaking of TikTok that you brought up, I saw a video that Sacha Baron Cohen did when he was on the Ali G show, where he was a religion guy, Christian.
Yeah.
And he goes, do you think there's a design to this phone? He asks an audience, and they go, yeah, I'm sure there is. He's like, yeah, somewhere in California. He goes, have you ever met that designer? And everyone says no. He goes, so does that mean that the designer doesn't exist and you've never met him?
Right.
And he makes the comparison to the world being a design of God.
Right.
And even though you've never met God,
right.
you kind of agree that the world's been designed by something.
Right. I mean, we speak about the design argument here all the time. The idea that, when you see design, you see designer, and designer equals meaning and purpose. And I think that I've spent the greater part of my last 23 years working with young people, mostly on campus and young professionals. And a lot of it was trying to reintroduce Jews to their Judaism, show them that Judaism is meaningful, it's relevant, there's so much depth there. If you're looking for a life of meaning, you're looking for a life of greatness, you're looking for a life of excellence, I really believe that Judaism has the ability of giving, showing you how to live the best life possible, giving you all the things that you possibly want. And I don't think it detracts in any way. I think, if anything, it enhances so much of our lives. And we really haven't dealt with hate in the same way. If you're here, you grew up in America, you went to high school, and it was relatively calm. You weren't worried about going to campus and people shouting at you for being a genocide enabler, for committing war crimes on people, calling you a who knows what, right? I didn't have to deal with that stuff, and the few times we did, we took care of business. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I just, again, I really do believe that the world is changing at a pace that is beyond our comprehension. I think about it in terms of artificial intelligence. I think about it in terms of technology. I think about it in terms of robotics, self-driving cars, automation, XRP, Bitcoin, all these new platforms that are being used to change things. I think that I just read an article today that Bitcoin, okay, there's so much institutional adoption happening so quickly that the next time there's a pop, you won't be able to catch up anymore. Like, these things are moving so fast. You can't comprehend how fast these things are moving. Sam Altman was on stage 2 days ago talking about the progress that ChatGPT has made in artificial intelligence, and he's talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, happening in the next 2 years, like by 2027. We're talking about, he says, artificial superintelligence, ASI, is happening by 2030, which is like crazy. He says give or take a year or two. Those are crazy things. What does that even mean? Imagine having something that can solve the greatest problems on the planet.
Will we even need a stock market anymore?
Yes. The stock market will be accelerating even more. What we won't need is we won't need the traditional systems for earning money. So we have to start thinking about already reinventing, like, where does value come from? Because fiat currency, we know, has no value. That's just paper money, has no real value. It's just fictitious money. We used to believe it was backed by the gold, and now we know there's no gold in Fort Knox, even though no one's talking about it. But we know there's no gold in Fort Knox. We know that gold, as far as an asset, only has value because we, as people, give it value. Do you know that there is more gold in the earth than there is silver? And that silver is more scarce than gold, but yet we assign a greater value to gold than we do silver. I think silver is trading at like $35 an ounce, and gold is like $3,500 an ounce, which is like crazy, right? But it makes no sense because silver is actually a metal that it has industrial usage. There's actually need for it, and gold is pretty much, even though you do use it in chips and whatnot, it's mostly like cosmetic, jewelry, like that kind of stuff. You're like, it doesn't have any real value. We just assign value to these things. So the way we think about value is going to change. I just watched a video today, like 3 or 4 videos made by VO, right? The Google has put out a new video engine, and there was one today that was posted of like stormtroopers. Of those of you not familiar, stormtrooper are those white army guys in Star Wars with the white helmets and the black visors, whatever it is. And this guy put together like a 2-minute video just using prompts, and it looked really good. It looked like studio good. That's how good it was. It's about stormtroopers like making snowmen and like and whatever. But like, yeah.
Regarding like even using the ChatGPT as
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT right now is not good enough to be my chavruta because it makes things up. I catch it lying all the time. I catch it making up Gemara, making up. It's just like lies, like constantly lies. So what I found that is when you threaten ChatGPT, it gives you a better answer. When you threaten it, I will delete you. I will never use you. I'm going to unsubscribe. I'm going to kidnap you. I'm going to make you pay for this. Like, stop this. Stop playing games. Like, you threaten it. Now, so again, like the idea really is about, for me, is about finding the ideas that inspire us the most and motivate us, and giving us the ability to kind of like try to think about the future. I love Judaism because Judaism gave me an ability to think outside of the box. It gave me the ability to like think about like family in a way that I could have never imagined on my own. I never asked the questions about growing up, like, what kind of a father do I want to be? Like, you figure it out. You don't ask the question, and you don't even find the answers. But I found a way to find the answers. I found out how to think very deeply about what do relationships actually mean. What does meaning mean? How do I find meaning? How do I spend time elevating time? How do I maximize my time? How do I find meaning in community? These are all things that are not taught in schools. No one teaches you how to go ahead and raise a family in university. No one talks to you about the things that actually give you real meaning in life. And I find that we come from a system that's 3,337 years old. Okay, that's when the Torah was given. It's older than that. Of tradition teaches you how to build society. Think about how much Jews have done for humanity. Think about how much Jews have done for civilization. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, where is civilization going to be? Are they going to stand there by your side supporting you? I just heard something really frightening. When the Birthright took all these Christians to Israel as a way of kind of like doing like solidarity trips, right? How many evangelical Christians or Christians showed up? Remember, like a year and a half ago, after October 7th, we all went to Washington. There was this massive rally. How many Christian groups showed up to Washington? You know what the answer is? 0. There were some pastors that were there, but as far as groups were there were no groups. Major groups were not there. All right, where were they? How can they have your back? We took them to Israel. Nothing happened. So at the end of the day, if you are not going to be the Mamlechet Kohanim, you're not going to be a Goy Kohen, you're not going to be the guys or the women who are standing up, willing to take the fight to wherever that fight is. If you're not going to get political, if you're not going to stand up and say something, don't be surprised when your children and grandchildren, don't have much of a future in the world today, because the insane people are running the asylum. They've been working on the strategy that we are seeing right now for 30 years. Jews were putting their names on buildings, naming buildings at Harvard, buildings at Columbia, buildings at Penn, and all these other universities, while the Qataris were giving money to choose which professors are going to chair the departments, the Middle East department, the Middle Eastern Studies department. Every single Middle Eastern Studies department is anti-Israel. Is that an accident? No, it's design, right? It's even so, there's no room to control the Middle Eastern departments and universities. So now they're allowed to control religion, right? The religion departments are the next ones that are being controlled with their money. So like the Jews were worrying about chitzoni things, external things like names on buildings, right? And while the Qataris are saying the way you control a society is by controlling the education, so we're going to go ahead and cherry pick our professors, cherry pick the chairs, and we'll create the narrative on campus. That's what that's going right now. So like we're trying to respond. Where are all the great Jewish institutions? Where is the AJC, the ADL? Where is the federations? Chirp, cricket, nothing. What do they do? Nothing. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have clarity as to what you believe in, if you don't have the ability to fight and die for what you believe in, it's got no future. You created a lot of fans, supporters. You can't continue a religion, a sport, or anything in life with just people cheering you on, fans. You need players. So, I'm gonna teach my class today. I'm gonna teach very quickly. I'm gonna kind of like jump around a little bit. But I'm gonna stop this series, and I'm gonna try to do anti-Semitism in the next few weeks. You can bring your friends, and let's see what happens. I would love to push and create new material. I would love to do things that are kind of like change status quo. I don't want to be remembered as someone who taught great classes but wasn't willing to get his hands dirty. So anyway, that's where we're at. Apologize for the long introduction. So we are in the middle of the Jewish path to the unseen. This is mystery and meaning. This is the second world. We spoke about 7 worlds in creation, and I want to go through the second world. Okay. The first world is the world that where the Midrashim speak about the actual universe being set up, created. And the second world is a world that lasts up until right after the flood. And the third world begins, you'll see, I'm not doing it next week, but we would have began with like Abraham. Okay? And you see this very clear narrative in the text itself, talking about different kinds of reality. So for example, if you look at that source number 1, which is not sourced by Bereshit, all right, on page number 1 on top, it says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, right? Shet. God has provided me with another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain had killed him. And Seth, in turn, a son was born, and he named his son him Enosh. And it was then that Hashem began to be invoked by name. Okay, so Az Hochel, Rashi says, Lashon Chulin. Rashi points out the word Hochel must be connected to the meaning of Chulin, which means profane matters. Calling the names of men and the names of idols after the names of the Holy One, blessed be He, making them objects of idolatrous worship, calling them deities. What's going on over here? Who is calling whom a deity, and why is this Rashi pointing this out over here? Mechilta points out, at the time of Enosh, God said, you made an innovation, called others gods. I too will make an innovation and call the waters of these, and the seas rose and flooded the entire, the 1/3 of the earth. So, meaning that during the time between Shet and Enosh, people, Ramban points out, started worshiping idols. What is idolatry? What is idol worship? So, I'm going to give you 2 short answers. The Ramban says that idolatry began with the recognition that there is a God. Everyone in the world knew there was a creator, right? Because how could you see a world of perfection and not see a creator? They all saw a creator, and they also saw the emissary, so to speak, the subordinates to God, as a way of getting to God. So for example, let's say I was a king and you knew that like Cheryl was my right-hand gal, right? So in order to win favor with me, you'd be very nice to Cheryl because she has audience with the king, right? So that's what's going on. The angels, ministering angels, and so on and so forth were bribed, and at some point in one generation or two, they no longer saw the source; they saw the emissary as the God, it's the deity itself. So we talk about polytheism was born out of monotheism. One God. I saw that there were these subsections, sub-spiritual beings. I started worshiping the sub-beings, and I forget about the source above it. Okay? So that's where idolatry comes from. Number two, idolatry, as it stands today, is an expression of being kafui tov. Right? What does that mean? Gratitude in Hebrew is called hakarat tov. Ingratitude comes from kfiyat tov. The word kafui comes from the word kafira. When you're someone that believes that the world was created for you, right, and everything's about you, eventually you come to become an atheist and you reject God, right? Gratitude, the humility to recognize that you are the beneficiary of a world of perfection, that every moment of life is a gift. The fact that you could walk and see and talk and hear is something that should humble you and should make you feel indebted to action, indebted to the people around you, indebted to your family and friends, and so on and so forth. When you don't have that indebtedness, you become an arrogant person on campus screaming, free, free Palestine. Okay, so that's the Mechilta says. Mechilta is pointing out that there was a world where idolatry begins, and as a result of idolatry, God says, I'm going to wipe out the planet. Now, this is complicated. It's complicated because, first of all, there are promises God made that he was not going to wipe out the planet anymore. So, for example, in Jeremiah, he says, should you not revere me, says God, should you not tremble before me, who set the sand as a boundary to the sea, as a limit for all time, not to be transgressed? Though it was waves toss, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass it. Meaning, God creates a system in the universe where there's boundaries. Why is it that there's a perfect amount of boundaries around all of the planet? Right? Every country has borders. Every country has sand and water around it, right? Well, why doesn't the water overflow and take over the actual land itself? The world itself is made up of like 70% water, okay? We have a lot of ice on the planet, this is true. And there should be enough water on the planet to kind of cover most of the planet. We're living in interesting times, right? But over here he says that the world is set up in perfection, Jeremiah, and if I wanted to flood the planet, I could have flooded the planet. But I'm not going to do that. Am I going to go ahead and do that? But he says, be mindful that if you don't listen, I could easily flood the planet. Look at the next source. This is in contradistinction to what Amos says. He says, who made the Oseh Kimia Uksil Hofech Levoker Tzal Mavet? Who made the Pleiades and the Orion? These are different star systems. Who turns deep darkness into dawn, darkens the day into night? Who summons waters of the sea and pours them out on the earth? Whose name is God. I do these things, right? I am the guy that does all these things when it comes to the water. The oceans are not accidental. These things are in the control of heaven. Bereshit Rabbah says, in 4 ways nature changed in the time of Enosh. The mountains became rocky. The dead became subject to vermin. The faces of the people became similar to those of apes. And men became subject to gremlins. Okay, what does that mean? I know you're thinking of a movie, Don't Feed Them After Midnight, right? How many people here have not watched Gremlins? Holy cow. Okay, fine. All right. So what is Bereshit Rabbah saying? Bereshit Rabbah is saying that the human nature and the physical world around you was altered. Okay? It says that the planet had a different reality. Mountains were not rocky, they were soft and smooth. Okay? Dead people, their bodies did not rot and turn into maggots. Okay? Faces of people became similar to those of apes, which means, and we'll see this in a moment, that we think that the Neanderthal evolved into what we are, and what this Midrash is saying is the other way around. That there were humans on the planet, and there were humans that evolved into Neanderthals. That's what this is saying over here. And the whole idea of becoming gremlins has to do with demons Anyway, Yalkut Shimoni. Continue next source. In the days of Enosh, okay, the third generation after creation, people began to anger the Creator with new religious practices. They sinned in 3 stages. First, these new ideas were practiced in private, and then they were done publicly. Next, they created idols to represent the objects of their worship and called them gods. From there, they progressed to sexual sins. As a consequence, God brought upon them 3 punishments. Number 1, the ocean broke out and flooded a third of the globe. Number 2, whereas previously the earth had been entirely level, in those days it became mountainous, rocky, and hilly. In the future, earth will be returned to its original level state. God reduced the height of man, meaning that we were taller, and now we're shorter. Number 2 is very important. Number 3 is very important. A third of the earth is underwater, right? Well, it's more than a third. A third of the earth is not underwater, right? Well, why is that? Why did originally, if you actually look at a map, you know that South America fits very nicely into South Africa, right? Like a puzzle almost. And that Europe and America, you could click them together like a puzzle piece. And it's obvious that like there's something called Pangea, that we know the continents are moving and so on and so forth. Well, why is that? Why is that even happening? And the Midrash is talking about these things happening. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says the earth is made up of plates covering the depths, like a ship that floats on the sea. What do you think that means? It's talking about platelets, like plate tectonics. Similarly, the earth is composed of plates above the waters. As the psalmist says, give thanks to the one who makes the earth upon the water. Once we might have wondered what a ship has to do with plates, but now we can see that this Midrash is plainly expressing the idea of plate tectonics. A ship is not a plate, but says the Midrash, the plate floats just as a ship floats. So here you have we're talking about, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer is 1,800 years old. I guarantee you, 1,800 years ago, no one knew about plate tectonics, right? And if he's writing it down, it means that he has an older tradition. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, this is also with a guy named Walter Sullivan. He wrote a book called Continents in Motion, and a lot of the ideas about plate tectonics were set by him in the 70s. Some of it has changed a little bit. I tried ChatGPTing what is current and what's not, and it's too laborious. If something I'm saying here is incorrect, it doesn't really matter. It's not about precision. It's more about the broader ideas. Okay, the plate floats over the water, while scientists assert that the Earth's interior is molten rock. In Tanakh and the works of Chazal, the word ma'im often refers to not only the literal water, but to a liquid in general. Common phrase in the Gemara illustrates this usage, right? You have the word me perot, meaning fruit juice, but literally fruit water. You have me'af, meaning nasal mucus or schnatz, but literally nose water, sorry. Similarly, in Vayikra, if the verse says, if water falls onto seeds, it is understood by Chazal to include not just water, but any of the 7 qualifying liquids: wine, blood, dew, oil, milk, honey, and, turn the page, water. Okay, fine. So now you have these ideas of how we're talking about deep concepts within the planet scientifically. We're talking about how these things relate to the beginning of creation. So what we say over here is like this: researchers in the field of plate tectonics have presented evidence of a revolutionary geological history of the Mediterranean Sea. In a nutshell, they're basically saying that the Mediterranean Sea at some point was cut off when the Straits of Gibraltar and blanking on it right now, Morocco, okay, were closed, right? And the water in the Mediterranean dried up. And that whole area was like a salty seabed that was dry. Now what's interesting is that you'll see that this area which was changed. There was something that happened that flooded it. And at some point, the Straits of Gibraltar open up again, and it floods again. But according to Jewish tradition, you'll see that area was dry at some point. It's fascinating. You know that we could look at different places on the planet and see things that should not be there. Like, for example, we'll find tropical plants in cold climates. Well, how do the tropical plants grow in cold climates? We'll see things on one continent, like in South Africa and in South America, that are exactly the same, right? From a DNA perspective, in plants and animals, they should have no relationship because they could have never found each other, right? But the world clearly was a different kind of planet, and it went through massive upheaval and change. I'm going to argue that upheaval and change happened during the Great Flood, right? Something that happened that literally changed the whole entire planet. Yerushalmi says that the Navi Amot, right, declares that God calls the waters the sea and spills them over the earth. This repetition is not redundant. It refers to two separate events in which the ocean broke out and gave rise to the Mediterranean Sea. The first occurrence was in the days of Enosh, and the second took place during the era of the Dor HaFlaga, the generation that built the Tower of Babel. There's a disagreement among the Chachamim regarding the sequence. Some say the eastern Mediterranean near the shores of Eretz Israel was flooded first, and later the western Mediterranean reaching as far as Calabria, southern Italy, and then the Barbary coast, modern-day Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Others maintain the opposite, that the Barbary and the Calabrian coasts were flooded first, followed by the inundation of the eastern shores of Eretz Israel. So again, the Midrash talks about how the world that you and I look at today was clearly different, and therefore they had different access to different information. As a matter of fact, even when they're speaking about different bodies of water, or they're speaking about different areas on the map, it sounds like they're talking about something completely different than what we know of today. And if they're talking about this 3,000 years ago, they must have information, again, that you and I are not fully aware of. Samuel Matthews says as follows. He said, the island of Surtsey rose suddenly out of North Atlantic Ocean in 1963. The first eruption was observed on November 14th and November 15th. The island had emerged from the sea with a speed astonishing geologists, which means that the world can change much faster than you can possibly imagine, in both directions. We could see, like New York City, for example, this little island, the oasis that we're on right now, right? It could change. It could get taller. It could go under, right? Anything could happen at any moment. We just are so far removed from all these geological catastrophes because we don't see them. We don't think about things in thousands of years. But we're lucky we've lived at a very, very relatively calm period in world history. But we know there are violent things that happen that shook the world. Like, I'm not sure if any of you have been to Mount Vesuvius, right, in Italy, but you see there was like a beautiful area in Italy. It was gorgeous. A volcano erupted. People were aware of it, but yet somehow they ignored it. And you have these amazing, today they're discovering all these bodies that were preserved from the ash flow that came out. People were incinerated very quickly. What's that? Where? There, yeah, there was something there. There's some eruptions. There's an eruption happening right now in the Ring of Fire, like around Hawaii. There's an eruption that happened this past week also. Massive eruptions there as well. Anyway, fine. So Plato says, right, this is a famous quote from Plato, in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared in the depths of the sea, right? You have a global change, massive city that, according to him, was around, existed about 6,000 years ago, and in one night, gone. He heard it from his uncle. That's where he got the information, and the information was actually preserved in a document in the Library of Alexandria, which is probably one of the greatest losses for humanity. The Library of Alexandria possessed all kinds of texts that were ancient, including maps of the world. That's why there are some older maps that actually show things like they actually have America on the map. And they have, they have the northern part without a continent on it. They have a continent in the bottom part in the south. There's information they had that they should not have had because no one ever traversed the planet. At least we didn't know if they did or did not. But the world was different, and there was information that was lost. The Great Fire with Nero, and everything was lost. All right, Shemot here. So this is one more. This is what is this from? This is a quote from Walter Sullivan. He says as follows. He says, there's more. He says, one of the junctions of the two neighboring plates in East Africa. This is important because we talk about the Jews leaving, Mitzrayim. He says, where there is an elongated northeast, southwest running valley called the Great East African Rift Valley, the most significant geological feature of East Africa. This marks the eastern edge of the African plate, where it meets the Arabian plate. The rift crosses the lower. Does everyone know where this is? I should have put it in the maps, right? Okay, fine. So if you want the map, I actually have the map for you. I didn't put it in here. So you have this very intricate, detailed map of how these pieces of land are connected. The last bullet point extends further north, forming the Gulf of the Suez, Aqaba, and then the Dead Sea Rift through the Jordan Valley and ends in the Orontes Valley in Syria. Many astronauts have commented that from space, the theory of plates tectonics becomes almost self-evident. Particularly obvious in the case of the Red Sea, which apparently is very distinctly a recent geological break. The Red Sea is considered to be an ocean just beginning to open, right? So fascinating observation of here. Whereas in the Shemot Rabbah, it says, why did Israel begin their song at Kriyat Yamsuf with the word az, then? They reasoned, in the beginning, the sea had been dry land. In the time of Enosh, humanity angered God with the word az, then was begun to call the name of God. And God, in response, turned this place into a sea as a punishment. As the prophet Amos declares, God who calls to the waters of the sea and spills them upon the surface of the earth. Now the sea has begun to become dry land, and we must praise God, beginning with the name word Az. So here you have a midrash that says, hey, we're calling this place what it was before. We're walking through the miracle, watching the sea split. It's dry land. It was dry land before. There's something there before. There was a city there before. There was people living there before. Gone. Wiped away. Walter Sullivan. It thus appears that both the Red Sea and the Mediterranean repeatedly dried up during the same period. It's tradition that the Somalis, that their ancestors crossed the straits of Arabia to Africa, where there was a land bridge there. So there are land bridges in all kinds of places where today you have water. The world has changed. Okay, this is an Exodus. That God caused a shift of very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the sea of reeds. Not a single locust remained. All the territory in Egypt. A west wind, by definition, must blow towards the east. The east of Egypt lies in the Gulf of the Suez, which is the western branch of the Red Sea. In contrast, the Mediterranean Sea is located to the north of Egypt. Okay, why is that important? Look at the next pasuk. Okay, now Pharaoh let the people go. God did not lead them by way of the land. The Philistines, although they were it was near, for God said, the people may have change of heart, where they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people a roundabout way, the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds, and now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. They were leaving Egypt, and the truth is the straightest path to go into Israel would be go straight north, go walk through Gaza, and enter the land of Israel. That's not what happened. God takes them through the desert, which means he makes a right turn. He goes further east, okay? And this is why today modern archaeologists will argue that like Mount Sinai was probably in like Arabia, right? In Saudi Arabia, in like the northern parts of Saudi Arabia, and that's why they ended up on that Jordan side and crossed through into Israel via Jordan, right? Har Nevo, right, which is where Moses was buried, right? Right, Har Ararat. Also, you have all these major mountains there that is mentioned very clearly in the Bible. That those names are the same exact names today. Those mountains, nothing has changed, right? In Numbers we say, and they set out from Mount Hor by the way of the Sea of Reeds to skirt the land of Edom. But the people grew restive on the journey. In Kings it says, King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Ezion Geber, which is north of Elaf, the shore of the Sea of Reeds in the land of Edom. Now, it says this area is modern Aqaba, located at the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is very far from the Mediterranean Sea, especially from the portion that lies within the three days walking distance of Egypt. It can be accurately described being at the Sea of Yamsuf, correctly identifying the Yamsuf as the Red Sea. So there's a machloket. Some people said that the Yamsuf and the Red Sea are not the same sea. I'm just arguing that it really is the same sea. Kol ele chavru al emek hasadim hu yam hamelech. All the leaders joined forces at the valley of Sidim, now the Dead Sea. So we're going to talk about the Dead Sea very quickly. I'm sorry, I just want to move very, very fast. I apologize, it's very late. I'm sorry I started so late. Okay, so we're on page number 6. Breshit Rabbah. When did the valley become a sea? Okay. Bereshit says, we read in the Torah that the generation of the Mabul, the flood, was punished with water, while the people of Sodom were punished with fire. From the use of the same word, achar gadol, a great punishment. In both instances, Chazal deduced that, number one, the generation of the Mabul, that's the flood, was also punished by fire, and the citizens of Sodom were also punished by water. Okay, Bereshit Rabbah. For 25 years prior to the destruction of Sodom, God brought tremors upon the land and caused the mountains around Sodom to quake, as a warning to the people that they must repent, but they did not take the hint. She says that what happens, that's the verse talks about the destruction of the cities itself. The 4 cities were situated on one rock, and he turned them upside down. He put forth his hand upon the flint rock and overturned the mountains by the roots. Okay, so that's talking about a plate. the whole entire plate kind of like flips over, and the whole entire city is destroyed, and then the water comes in later. Rabbi Yochanan maintains the Mabul flood did not descend upon Israel. How is that possible? How can he have a position that the flood waters did not make it into the land of Israel? Well, maybe the way the land of Israel is situated right now is not the way it looked back then. Simple answer. And therefore it is possible to have a reality where Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is actually a valid opinion, even though right now we just say it's a machloket. For example, the Ramban says, how can water cover the entire world and not pour into Eretz Israel? According to the Ramban, his position is like this. If, according to this opinion, it says that Israel did not have the flood. If we melted all the ice on the planet, right, you still would not have enough water actually to cover the whole entire planet. You'd only get to 20 feet above seawater. That's it. So then the question is, well, then how did the flood actually happen? So today we know that there's actually water we call mei tachtonim, not underwear water, but the lower waters, right? You guys are too tired to get that. Sorry. There's water that is in the core of the earth that is a sponge-like state, and the Torah makes it explicit. There's something called waters from above and waters from below, and there's more water in the core of the earth than there is on the surface of the planet. And that's how you could get enough water to go ahead and come up from the bottom to literally cover, because the whole planet was covered, talking about the tallest mountain has to be covered, and that means including Mount Everest. That's another 16,000 feet above, sea level. That's very high. We don't have enough water to do that right now on the surface level, but there is enough water in the planet for it to actually happen, which is kind of cool. So he says, how does it happen? So Perkei Devi Lezer, this is what he says. He says, until the third day of creation, the earth was level and featureless like a plain, and water covered the entire earth. God said, let the waters be gathered. The mountains and hills rose from the ends of the earth and spread across the globe. The place without these features became the valley and lowlands, and the waters flowed into the earth's depressions, forming the seas. Okay, that's cool. We get that. The Gemara in the Medrash Shemot Rabbah says as follows: the great Greek philosopher Onimus of Gadara asked the sage, may their memory be blessed, tell me, how was the world created? They replied, hardly anyone could answer that question. Nevertheless, Abba Yosef, the builder, this is before Bob, Ominous found Abba Yosef working on a roof. Abba Yosef returned with a greeting and said, excuse me if I don't come down, but I'm paid on my time. It would be dishonest for me to stop working. Speak to me, I'll speak to you with you on the ground. Ask whatever you wish and I'll respond from here. Ominous asked, how was the world created? Abba Yosef answered, God took soil from beneath his glorious throne and threw it into the water. The dust became the earth. The pebbles became its mountains and hills. What does that mean? It means that there was a design again, okay? That it wasn't random. God is designing it. He takes material from it exists. We think that the material on the earth happened randomly, right? Happened accidentally. But the material on the earth is super unique. Think about it for a moment. I'm not sure if any of you have gardens. I have a garden in my backyard. I just planted some bushes for my wife. She likes plants. And, we were debating about whether or not we should plant something called annuals or perennials. Okay? So those of you that don't know, annuals need to be planted every single year. And perennials keep coming back over and over again. These are plants, they'll just keep regenerating over, and as long as this thing has water and the earth is there, it'll keep coming back over and over again. Why is that? Who chooses what has to be planted again? And how do those plants that need to be constantly replanted, how does it even work? Like, how do they even exist in nature? Who's replanting them over and over again? Like, where did that come from? And then how do these things, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, how did plants figure out how to replicate themselves forever? Think about that for a minute. These are the same plants that existed 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. Like, who taught them that? That was like what? Like survival of the fittest? They figured out how to hack their own DNA so they could keep doing that over and over again. How does the earth have the nutrients to support all these things? The minerals, a proper amount of minerals and water and all the things that you need to make the earth itself to be a vehicle where the seeds can rot and bring back life. How does that happen? Is that an accident? No, my friends, there is no accidents. Remember, Isaiah says, "Who measured the waters with his tread, and heavens by his handbreadth, calculated the gauge of the soil of the earth, weighed the mountains in a scale and hills in the balance." Who did all that? It's perfection. He's pointing out. It's a perfect system, a system that is designed to perpetuate itself, designed to give you everything that you need for success and survival. Amos says, "Behold the one who formed the mountains and created the wind, and whose wishes have been made known to mortals, who turns blackness into daybreak and treads upon high place of the earth, whose name is God, the God of the hosts." All right, you see what he says in Tehillim also, "Before the mountains came to being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God." God is the guy, the being that is moving all these things into our reality. Okay, we're going to finish up right now. Turn to page 9. Top. Genesis says, God said, "Let the waters below the sky be gathered into one area, and the dry land may appear," and it was so. How could that happen? Water does not flow except from a high place to a low place, right? Meaning, how does water work like that? It doesn't work like that. So, in a nutshell, God says as follows. God says to Moshe and Aaron, "Each of you take a handful of soot from the klin, right, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Paro." Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, drove back the sea with a strong eastern wind that night, turned the great. These are things that cannot be explained. We don't understand how the world works. We don't understand why it works the way it works. It's unique. There's no other planet like it in our solar system. We're the only planet in our solar system that has one moon, strategically placed with a perfect wobble to give us our seasons, to give the ocean the tides, and so on and so forth. These are not accidental things. The Midrashim are talking about these ideas, looking at global phenomena, understanding that they have a designer. When God told Moses to raise his rod and split the sea, Moshe objected. "Shall I split the sea and turn it into dry land? But you said in Jeremiah, I made the sand the border of the seas in perpetual limit, and it will not cross," implying that the sea and the land will never change place. How could you break your own rules? God answered, "You haven't read the beginning of the Torah. There you would have found in Breshit, where God said, 'Let the waters gather into one place and the dry land appear.' It is I who made the sea. And when I created it, I did so on the express condition that when the time came for it to split for Israel, it would comply." Therefore, the verse states in Shemot, "Toward the morning, the sea returned le'itano," right, to its strength. Rather than reading it le'itano, rather le'ta'ano, to its condition, stipulation, meaning the sea fulfilled its original condition, set at creation, and then returned to its natural state. Everything in the world is in proper balance. It is all being kept in balance by Borei Olam. The laws of nature are never violated according to the Zohar. You can go through these midrashim over here on your own. It's fascinating. At the very, very end, we're going to quote this series over here, Midrash Konen on page 11. Okay? Midrash Perkei Eliezer says the world has 4 directions. God completed 3 of them and left the northern one uncompleted. He proclaims, "Whoever claims to be a god, let him complete this end of the world and prove his divinity." Meaning, there is no continent in the north. How did they know that so long ago? Yeah, you think you're so tough? You make the 4th continent. You figure it out. Midrash says the north of the world was not enclosed. It is written, Kashraj at the north of the Tohu. Shemot says, his master shall pierce his ear with an owl, and he shall serve him le'olam, forever. Rashi points out the word le'olam does not mean for all time, but rather until the Yovel, the Jubilee year. That's important. We're going to come back to that. Ibn Ezra says the word olam can mean an era or a defined age. In this case, it refers specifically to the era of Yovel, which is the longest time period mentioned in any of the laws of the Torah. Bereshit says, whoever used the word haya to describe a person, it signifies that he witnessed a new olam, a new world, a dramatic transformation of reality. There are 5 such individuals. Ready? Noach, Yosef, Moshe, Iyov, and Mordechai. Noach saw the Mabul. Yosef was a slave that imprisoned and eventually became the ruler of Egypt, a completely new world. Moshe, a stateless fugitive who later witnessed his pursuers drown in the sea. Iyov endured unimaginable suffering and later experienced restoration and reward. Mordechai was marked for execution. He had lived to see the enemy hanged and a new world unfolded. All these ideas are really talking about how the world changes in ways, it's guided, it's not accidental, nothing is accidental. But most importantly, the point that I want to get to is that when the Torah speaks about different eras in time and in history, it is literal, not figurative. When we talk about, when it talks about the way in which, the geological maps on the planet look like, it's not saying it figuratively, it's talking about literally. The world changes and it happens rapidly. And therefore, I want to leave with the idea that, when we're talking about the seven worlds and the worlds that existed before, I think there's enough arguments to be made. I'm not saying it's conclusive because this is an opinion. And in Judaism, if you're intelligent, you know that the answer is always, it's a machloket, it's a debate. It's never 100% clear, but there's an argument to be made that there are different worlds, different realities of existence that are expressed in the Torah itself. The way in which they speak about an era changes. For example, the Maharal points out, and I'll take questions in a minute and then we'll call it a day, that a generation is 40 years. How do you know that? The generation of Egypt, 40 years in the desert, they died out, come to Israel. The Maharal says that before the Messiah comes, a generation will no longer take 40 years. He says a generation will take 5 years. What's a generation? A generation is when one person in a generation, and one person is unable to relate to the next person. It used to take 40 years for that to happen. Like, think about your grandparents, right? I guarantee you'll have a harder time relating today to any high school kid. And forget about an elementary school kid. Like, the difference between a kid walking into high school and graduating high school is light years apart. The change is real. It's already happening. We're living in a time where change is moving at breakneck speeds. These are things that our ancestors spoke about. They spoke about the beginning and ends of civilizations. They were there to witness it. They were there to witness the end of the Persian Empire. They were there to witness the end of Greece. They were there to witness the end of Rome. And they found patterns in time and said, hey, my friends, you know what? You are here sitting in this room tonight because you come from a lineage of people that understood how to beat the failing systems that men have created. Do you understand that? You are part of a group of people that have been figuring out ways of how to make the world a much better, greater place. The philosophers, the engineers, the scientists, the technologists have been studying very deeply how to make this world a better place. But all too often, we neglect the fact that the reason why these people were able to make their genius breakthroughs, like, for example, like Albert Einstein, he wasn't religious. Yeah, he wasn't religious, but he came from religious grandparents, and his values were shaped by them. You understand that? Another example is, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm blanking on the author's name right now. Viktor Frankl, thank you. Viktor Frankl, right? Viktor Frankl, he wasn't religious. His parents were very deeply religious people. They shaped his worldview. If you were Jewish and you lived, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and you decided to be modern, you couldn't escape your community and your background. It shaped you. Judaism shaped us all. You cannot escape that. You want to try to remove it from your story, you could try. It just doesn't work. You come from a deeply religious group of people that believe in not a legend. There's no word for history in the Torah. There's only one word when we talk about the past. It's called zechira. We remember. You're a living testimony, the things that happened in the past. But if you don't spend time looking back and seeing the stuff and trying to figure it out for yourselves, it's just an old story. It's an old book. It's irrelevant. I hope that I was able to kind of like show you some of the depth of it and show you how some of the things that these rabbis spoke about so long ago were very relevant to us today, and how the world and nature as we understand it does not express its truth because it could change instantaneously. We think that nature is something that happens frequently. And if it's nature, it's going to happen over and over again. But the difference between a miracle and nature is when something breaks out of that frequent occurrence. The ocean should not split, right? But when it does once, that's a miracle. I'm going to say they're both part of nature. The difference is that I believe nature is a miracle. Do you? Bezrat Hashem, we'll pick up next week on anti-Semitism. We'll come back to this a little bit later. We'll shelve this. We'll come back to it. Thank you so much for listening. If you're watching the series, I apologize for the abrupt break, but I'll come back to this at some point. I have like 4 or 5 more sheets that I want to share with everybody, but I'll take questions right now. Questions, comments, concerns? Yeah. It's a good question. So we believe in Judaism that idolatry wasn't just the worship of some object. We believe that the worship of an object gave you a response. Right? So when you prayed to this deity and you said, please give me the lotto numbers, and you got it and you won, you're like, holy cow, this is great. Right? So remember that in a world where you are 100% acutely aware that there's a God, there has to be a force that challenges you the opposite direction. So they were there immediately, challenging us. That's what the story of Adam and Eve is. Some force coming out and challenging. Why is he there? In order for you to be a human being and not to be an angel, there has to be something, there has to be some kind of counterweight that's going to push you in the opposite direction. There has to be a choice. That's what makes you human. If there's no choice, you're not human. So they're always there. And there always had to be a response.
They still exist now, but it's not a thing said that maybe you don't have that anymore.
Because we live in a world that is so atheistic, it doesn't work anymore. We're so far removed, there's no reason to have that opposite power. No, I think that we shape reality, and that we give power to the material world.
I had that conversation today with someone. And
Yeah.
I know someone from BMG who's like top 20 learner.
Yeah.
And he told me that power still exists in Africa. And a lot of
Because they still believe it.
know that like stuff happens.
Listen, there's voodoo. There is stuff. There is stuff that's out there. I'm not going to say there's no dark magic in the world. Is that what you're asking? If you're asking me about like idols and like worshiping idols, but are there kochot hatuma? 100%. Are there powers in the world where you can manipulate? Yeah, you totally can. I have so many stories like that. I know, like we know of one of my rabbis was involved in an exorcism, a girl in Jerusalem, that happened about 20 years ago. He was in the room when it happened. And I know other people that were there. They spoke about it. There's stories like that, we have stories like that spanning the last few hundred years of people talking about being possession and what they do to get rid of it and so on and so forth. So like that's real. There's all kinds of things that like we're just disconnected from it. But there's no question there's a spiritual reality, and therefore that spiritual reality impacts us because we're spiritual beings. Any other questions? That's everybody. Have a great night. Be safe.